The day they cut me off the inheritance they thought they'd won. Cold, final, unforgivable. But I didn't beg. I built. In silence. In shadow. Until I uncovered a truth so powerful it shattered every lie they ever told. This isn't a story about loss. It's a story about reclaiming the legacy they never deserved to touch. The lawyer didn't even flinch when he skipped my name. He just turned the page like I'd never been part of the bloodline. The rest of them, the polished heirs, the handshakers, the good children, sat in silence, pretending not to notice. Graham got the vineyard. Claire got the beachfront. Even the cousin who barely showed up got a slice of something. Me? Nothing. Not a dollar. Not a sentence. Not even a rejection. Just absence, wrapped in legal paper and sealed with cowardice. I didn't speak. I didn't blink. I sat still while my father's voice echoed from the grave through every item passed down, every asset accounted for. I wasn't disowned. That would have taken confrontation. I was deleted. Quietly. Neatly. As if I'd never worn the uniform, never bled overseas, never carried the weight of decisions they'll never understand. They say the worst pain is being cut off. They're wrong. The worst pain is knowing they enjoyed it. They waited for it. They clinked glasses before the ink was dry. They rewrote the story and cast me out of it. And what stung most wasn't the loss. It was the smirks. The way they glanced at each other, like the threat had finally been removed. Like I wouldn't be a problem anymore. But here's the thing. I don't fight for applause. I don't chase closure. I don't make speeches at family tables where the knives are sharper than the silverware. I do what I've always done. I observe, I calculate, and I move in silence. That room thought it had the final word. But they never asked what I was building while they were building walls. They didn't know what I'd already taken. They thought cutting me out would erase me. What they didn't see, what they never saw, was that I'd stopped needing their approval a long time ago. I had my own plans, and none of them involved begging. Let them enjoy their inheritance. Let them smile through their toast. Because while they were celebrating, I was already 10 steps ahead. Already writing my own ending. Already flipping the power dynamic they'd taken for granted. And the best part? They'd never see it coming. Because no one watches the woman they think they've buried. No one questions the ghost. But ghosts have a way of walking through walls. And I was just getting started. They thought the will was the end of the story. What they didn't know was that the legacy they stole was already mine. And the moment they shut that door, I started building my own. What happened next didn't start with revenge. It started with Yemen. And the truth they tried to silence. It didn't happen all at once. That's how people like them operate. They don't slam doors. They just stop leaving them open. At first it was small. My name left off a group message, a conversation that changed when I walked in, a subtle hesitation when someone asked where I'd been. Then it grew louder in its silence. My father stopped introducing me as Commander Morgan. At one dinner, when a guest asked about my service, he deflected with a joke about how I'd gone off grid. Everyone laughed. I didn't. I passed the salt. After the mission in Yemen, I was never officially disgraced, just quietly removed, reassigned, diminished. The kind of demotion that comes with a smile and a handshake and a sudden drop in clearance. The uniform was still pressed, the rank still listed, but the room got colder every time I walked in. And at home, it was worse. There were no accusations, no confrontation, just a family photo, once framed above the piano, slowly replaced by one with me cropped out. My father said nothing. But one night, when I opened the hallway closet, I found the old version of that picture face down behind a stack of board games. That's the thing about erasure. It's not about making you disappear. It's about making you irrelevant. And for a while, I let them. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight, that the silence was protection, that they didn't know the full story, and maybe they didn't want to. But the truth was, I stopped believing I had a place. I stopped showing up to holidays. I stopped calling first. And when the last invite never came, I didn't ask why. I told myself I was too busy, too focused, too evolved for small talk and passive-aggressive toasts. But the truth? I was grieving people who were still alive, people who looked me in the face and chose not to ask. Not about the mission, not about the children, not about the silence I carried like a second spine. They thought I'd broken protocol. They never wondered why. They told themselves I had changed. But I hadn't changed. I had chosen. Chosen to act when no one else would. Chosen to carry 37 children out of hell without waiting for permission. Chosen to take the consequences so they wouldn't have to watch the system crack. But when I walked away from that mission, I wasn't just walking away from command. I was walking into a different kind of battlefield. One where reputation was currency and silence was a sentence. One where a woman who acted without orders was seen as arrogant, dangerous, disposable. The government sealed the files. My family sealed the door. And I stayed on the outside, watching them build their stories on the ashes of mine. I never gave them the full truth, not because I couldn't, because I knew they wouldn't know what to do with it. And the more I stayed silent, the easier it became for them to believe I deserved what I got. But just because I went quiet doesn't mean I disappeared. Just because they stopped looking doesn't mean I wasn't watching, waiting. Not for them. For the moment that would make them see what they threw away. For the day the story would force itself back into the room, wearing boots they couldn't ignore. It arrived on a stage I wasn't supposed to step on, with engines they didn't invite, and a salute no one was prepared to witness. I wasn't on the list, and they made sure I knew it. The email never came, the name tag wasn't printed, and the seating chart had just enough space between my absence and their comfort. It was the Morgan family's legacy ceremony, 3 generations of uniforms and clean narratives wrapped in patriotic bunting and revisionist pride. I arrived an hour early, parked 2 streets over, and walked the rest of the way in civilian black. No heels, no shine, just flat boots and silence. A hedge ran along the edge of the park where they held the event, and I stood behind it, still as stone, watching from the outside like I had for years. From where I stood, I could see my brother shaking hands with councilmen, my father greeting veterans like a man who believed in lineage more than blood, and a podium draped in red, white, and blue that would never hold my name. They started with a prayer, a speech, then a reading of names. All the Morgans were honored, even cousins who never deployed, even spouses who never trained. I listened as the applause rose and fell in neat rhythms, each cheer a nail in the story they built without me. I didn't expect my name, but hearing my brother's twice stung anyway. The crowd smiled like they believed it all, like the version of events they were fed was full and honest. But I knew what they were really celebrating. Not truth, not sacrifice, just preservation, control. They had locked the narrative in a glass case and shut me out of it because I broke the part of the story that required obedience. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I stood behind that hedge with my arms crossed and my back straight like I was still waiting for a mission brief. It wasn't about the stage. It was about what had been taken from me without a word. Then something shifted. Not a breeze. Not a feeling. A sound. Low. Weighted. Controlled. I heard it before they did. The slow approach of military engines rolling over gravel, not the pageantry kind, but the real thing. Tactical. Deliberate. Heads turned. The mayor stopped mid-sentence. A child near the front covered his ears. 15 matte black vehicles turned the corner in formation like a ghost unit summoned by memory. Dust curled behind them, kicking into the sunlight like a signal. They didn't slow down. They didn't announce themselves. They arrived. And at the center, stepping out from the lead vehicle, was General Michael Alvarez. 4 stars. Every inch composed. He didn't walk toward the stage. He didn't greet my father. He didn't acknowledge my brother. He walked past the crowd like they were fog and stopped 3 feet from where I stood. For a second, no one breathed. Then he lifted his hand, sharp and clean. The salute was crisp and public and irrevocable. His voice was steady. "Welcome back, Commander Morgan." And just like that, the version they thought was written in stone began to crack. The crowd froze, the applause vanished, and eyes began to search for the story they never bothered to ask about. I didn't move. I let the silence do the work. Because this wasn't the end. This was the rupture. And it was only beginning to open. But the most powerful truth that day didn't come from a general in dress blues. It came from someone who wasn't invited either. Someone with a voice no one expected to hear. He didn't look like a disruption. He looked like someone who'd wandered too close to the stage, a mistake in a well-rehearsed ceremony. Young, maybe 25, wearing a gray suit that didn't quite fit, and shoes that were dusty from walking across the field. But he walked with purpose, like he knew exactly where to go and exactly what needed to be said. A volunteer tried to intercept him but stopped when he handed over a folded piece of paper and whispered something too low to catch. The microphone changed hands. My brother stepped back. The crowd stilled again. Then he spoke. "My name is Amir Khaled. I was born in Yemen, and I was 7 years old when Commander Morgan carried me out of a basement filled with smoke and blood." The silence grew dense, like the air itself had turned to glass. I felt the breath catch in my throat but held my posture. His voice was calm, steady, even though I could see the way his fingers trembled slightly around the letter in his hand. I don't remember her face. I was drugged. Weak. I don't remember much except the sound of her boots, and the way she wrapped me in something that smelled like steel and dust and safety. I remember her voice. I remember her saying we weren't going to die in there. And we didn't. He looked up at the crowd then, eyes scanning the faces that had moments ago been clapping for speeches they barely listened to. "You honored the wrong people," he said quietly. "She was the one who saved us. All of us. 37 children. I was one of them. I'm alive because she didn't wait for orders. I became a trauma surgeon because she taught me, without knowing it, that saving lives sometimes means breaking rules." He unfolded the letter. "My sister passed away last year. She wrote this when she turned 18 and asked me to deliver it if I ever found out who rescued us." His voice cracked just once. I saw my father shift in his seat, eyes locked on the stage but not really seeing it. To the woman with the scar on her right hand. "I don't remember your name. I don't remember your face. But I remember the warmth of your hands. I remember you didn't leave us behind. Thank you for choosing us over your own safety. Thank you for carrying me when I couldn't move. I never forgot what safety felt like. And you were the first person who made me believe I'd survive." Amir folded the letter slowly, placed it against his chest, and looked straight at me. "Thank you, Commander, for everything." I didn't nod, didn't smile. I just stood there, letting the words land where they were meant to. Behind me, I heard someone sob softly. On stage, my brother stared at the ground like it held a script he hadn't rehearsed for. My father didn't move at all, but his hands gripped the edge of his chair so tightly the knuckles had gone white. The truth had finally stepped into the light, but it wasn't done moving. There was still one more person who hadn't spoken, and when he did, the weight of silence would never feel the same again. They thought I came to fight for scraps from a table they flipped long ago, but I wasn't there for their approval or apology. I didn't come to ask. I came to take not what was theirs, but what was always mine. And the moment I stepped into that final hearing, something shifted. The courtroom smelled of wood polish and old betrayal. My boots struck the marble like memories sharp and permanent across the aisle. Their lawyer cleared his throat too often. The sweat on his temple betrayed the calm mask he rehearsed. They didn't look at me not once, not even when I placed the folder on the desk, not even when the judge opened it and silence poured out like smoke inside. That folder was the final addendum my father signed with his own hand and voice, a video recorded in the last month of his life, dated notarized irrefutable in it. He named me sole heir executor and beneficiary of the estate, with words firm and unwavering. He addressed every lie they tried to forge. He named each asset, each clause, each contingency. His voice didn't tremble, but theirs did. When the judge read the transcript line by line, I watched their legacy unravel one forged document at a time. They tried to whisper objections, but the paper spoke louder than their mouths. The room didn't erupt. It deflated like a balloon that knew it was never meant to float. They accused me of manipulation, of coercion, of taking advantage of a dying man. But the timestamp proved otherwise. Every file lined up with precision, and when my father's video ended with the words, "She is the only one who stood by me when everyone else disappeared," the air left my brother's lungs like a punctured tire. My mother dabbed her cheek. Not from grief, but from fear, because now it wasn't about inheritance, it was about exposure. Truth doesn't scream. It arrives cold and steady, and when it does, it doesn't ask for permission. The gavel hit the desk once final and absolute, and in that sound I felt everything I'd lost and everything I reclaimed, not out of revenge, but out of return. They didn't just lose money, they lost control, and that's what burned the most. I didn't gloat, I didn't smile. I stood, I nodded, and I walked away, without looking back, because I didn't need their recognition to feel whole. I never did. Legacy isn't handed down, it's earned, reclaimed, built in silence and sealed in truth. And that day, I didn't just win a case. I ended a war they never saw coming, and this time, I didn't leave anything behind, not even my shadow. They tried to erase me, but the truth doesn't vanish just because it makes people uncomfortable. It waits, it watches, and when the moment is right, it reclaims its place, louder, stronger, undeniable. I didn't storm the gate screaming for what they owed me. I walked in silent, with receipts and resolve. Not just the paperwork, not just the signature. What I carried was the unshakable knowledge of who I was and what I had survived to become. They spent years crafting a version of the story where I was absent, broken, irrelevant. But the moment I stood in that courtroom in full uniform, steady hands, clear eyes, and a silence sharper than any scream, they knew. The power they hoarded so carefully was no longer theirs. I didn't take back what was theirs. I claimed what was always mine. And I did it without begging, without rage, without losing myself. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks in quietly and sits at the head of the table like it's always belonged there. And that day, it did. The lesson in this story isn't just about inheritance or family or betrayal. It's about self-worth, about choosing to stand in truth even when no one applauds, especially when no one applauds. You don't have to fight like them to win like you. You just have to outlast the lie and know your proof will speak when it matters most. If you've ever felt erased, minimized, or doubted by those closest to you, remember this. Silence doesn't mean surrender. It can be strategy. And your moment to rise will come if you keep building while no one's watching. What would happen if you started treating your truth like something sacred? Not something to defend, but something to stand on. What's one time you proved someone wrong, not by arguing, but by quietly becoming everything they said you couldn't be? Drop it in the comments. Your story could be the push someone else needs today. If this story moved you, hit subscribe so we can keep building a space where voices like ours are finally heard. One click might be small, but your support tells us these stories matter, and that keeps us going. Thanks for hearing what most chose to ignore. The truth needed someone to witness it, and that someone was you.